I think what we can kind of move on to is Reclaiming Space. Your book, the edited volume, it's an anthology. So progressive and multicultural visions of space exploration. I think it's key to like what you were talking about before of like the motivations of it, and then the inherent value systems that are embedded in some of these affordances of not just like the technology that brings us there, but then the social structures that undergird everything. I really want to get your kind of take on how I guess you got involved in this project, because I'm assuming you had your own kind of thing, but then as well that like that must be kind of cool to either get tapped or be involved in kind of this kind of thing. Because to be quite honest, other than the upcoming Routledge social science book on outer space that is $200 and I'm going to get because it's going to be a doorstop like Bible for me. But then also I started reading and saw Reclaiming Space and I was like, oh no, this is going to be a Bible as well, like in a certain kind of sense, because I started looking at the essays and the table of contents and just like, whoa, like now this is now we're pushing the forefront of like what it means to be in outer space. I'm going to read just some of it, and you mentioned this in one of your Substack posts. Space from afar, from Africa across the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, contact zones in outer space environments, a feminist archaeological analysis of space habitats, desire, duty, and discrimination. Is there an ethical way to select humans for Noah's Ark? Last one, the language of space. No, in African space art as a new perspective on space law. Like, okay, bravo.
Right.
Like, like, okay, we're in this now with like, and that's just a small sample of topics. I'll link, the books in the description. Incredible. I mean, it's a who's who of ideas and really thinking at the forefront. So I guess just talk about that experience, what it was like, the process of, now not writing something, but editing 27 original essays. So again, so this was a mammoth kind of undertaking, but very important work. So talk us through, how that happened and why it's important.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's so many people who are working on different aspects of these problems from so many different directions and areas of expertise. I certainly did not invent space ethics, and almost everything that I talked about in the book was inspired by something I had read by people like the contributors to Reclaiming Space. So to start at the beginning of the story, first I'll mention that one of my co-editors, Jim Schwartz, has transitioned since the book came out, and she uses the name
Okay.
Jamie Johnson Schwartz now, so I'll refer to Jamie. So Jamie and Linda have
Jamie
been thinking
Johnson
about
Schwartz.
putting this book together. Jamie is a philosophy professor at Wichita University, and she had been one of the first philosophers who in the modern era who wrote extensively about space ethics as a
Mm-hmm.
field of ethics. She has a couple of good books out with other space ethicists. In particular, she has contributed to writing about the expanse and ethics,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is really cool. And so anyway, she and Linda got together and were thinking about putting this volume together. Linda's been a consultant for NASA and thinking about a lot of these issues for a long time. And they approached the Just Space Alliance, Lucienne and I, and said, would either of you be interested in contributing as an editor to this volume? And Lucienne had too much on their plate, so I said yes. And it was a really interesting experience to be editing a book for the first time at the same time as I was writing a book
Yeah, sure,
for the
sure.
first time. Two very different experiences. So Reclaiming Space was constructed mostly to address a problem I mentioned earlier, which is that most of the public loudest discourse about space settlement and space exploration is kind of dominated these days by a pretty narrow demographic of wealthier Westerners, usually white, usually male, very commonly libertarian and neo-libertarian perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many other perspectives on what space is for and what our future should look like in space. And we just wanted to amplify more of those perspectives and put them out there in the public conversation. All of these people have been writing on these topics and talking about these topics, but we wanted to kind of put them together for people to find. And so, yeah, it was a fantastic experience. It is a little more, I would say, academically written. You can probably
Mm-hmm.
tell based on the titles of the chapters that you
Mm-hmm.
just read out. Off Earth I really wanted it to be as accessible as possible, and Reclaiming Space is a little more academic, but some of the chapters are extremely accessible. I really enjoyed reading them. And in particular, we included two science fiction authors,
Mm.
Mary
Okay.
Robinette Kowal and Vandana Singh, because we all recognize that science fiction authors have been doing this work of space ethics since before humans have been going to space. They've been thinking about not just what it would be like to live in space, but what kind of social complications, what kind of conflicts would come out of that. So we wanted to make sure we acknowledge that. And we tried to include a lot of different perspectives. We failed to include as many perspectives as we should have, and we have it's tough, man. It's like herding cats trying to put
is there more
a
like
book
volume
together.
2 already in
Well,
order?
no, there's nothing on the books. There's nothing in writing for that. It's, of course, it's something we talked about as we were putting the volume together. Is there's so much more we're leaving out that needs to be included. We'll see how things go.
Sure.
At the moment, I'm really focused on having these books come out the same year. They actually arrived at my house, the boxes of books, on the same day, even though they're from different publishers, which was funny. It makes me feel like I've said my piece for a little while, right? and what I'm really focused on right now is trying to amplify the voices of all of these other people who are talking and writing about these issues. So that's something I'm interested in pursuing next. But it was a great experience, and I keep looking at it. I got a stack of them over there that I keep looking at. It's a gorgeous book, and I'm really excited for people to read it and to learn more about all of these different people. So there's you mentioned one of the chapters is by a space archaeologist, Alice Gorman, who does really interesting work. There's tons of artists who contributed to this book. I think artists have a lot to contribute to conversations about space, and of course they also have their art to contribute, which is great. Science fiction authors, just tons of really interesting perspectives on space.
Yeah, Alice Gorman's interesting. I'm going to try to get her on the pod because she's with she works with Fred Sharman, who we had recently, and they're doing great work with terms of design and space architecture and habitat.
Alice and Fred and Justin Walsh have recently formed a consulting company called Brick Moon, which is a great name because it's a reference to one of the first science fiction stories about space stations. So
I guess not moving on, I'll just give a quick, so part 1, the evolution and history of spaceflight. Part 2, the art of envisioning space. Part 3, cultural narratives in spaceflight. Part 4, being accountable in the present. Part 5, visions of the further future. I mean, saw a lot of interesting authors that I had known about. Sherry Wells Jensen, very interesting. When I talked to someone in the STS kind of field she had mentioned her, and I didn't even know about this in the kind of crypt techno science movement and stuff. So very cool about that. I guess I don't want to be cliche and obviously ask you an impossible question like, who's your favorite, son or daughter or something, who's your favorite, essay. But I guess what was the one essay maybe, or maybe you can talk about the feeling of being surprised or challenged or something like that. Is there one that particularly stuck out to you?
This is hard to do without looking at the table of contents myself.
No,
like you mentioned, there's 27 chapters.
Good point.
All the ones you mentioned were ones I think I specifically put in a newsletter recently because I think there's especially accessible ones. They're not necessarily my favorite of them. I don't have a favorite, but they are especially accessibly written. Sherry Wells Jensen's chapter is great. So Sherry is a linguist, a xenolinguist, and she is also blind, and she works with Astro Access, which is a really cool organization that is working to figure out how disabled people, what kind of technologies need to be developed for disabled people to live and work in space. And they do really cool programs where they send various disabled participants on parabolic flights. So not all the way to space, but they do those airplane flights to go up and come down, and you get about 30 seconds of weightlessness. And they test things like how does sign language work if you're floating at different orientations to each other, and how do various mobility limitations, how do those work when you're in free fall? And Sherry has been on one of those flights, and it's just really fascinating. I managed to meet her recently in person. I got to see her give a talk. She gives a great talk, so I enjoyed her chapter in particular.
And then just even the going further into the, I guess, broader category of what what constitutes a body in space, etc., and like the physical I wouldn't say limitations of the human body, of any human body in space, and how it affects your bone density and your cornea and all kinds of stuff like that.